So my name is Easton-Calabria, and I'm a researcher focused on self-reliance and livelihoods and displacement. And I have the great pleasure of moderating this webinar today. And as Ali, our great coordinator, said, please feel free to introduce yourself in the chat. We're doing a function where you'll be putting questions in the chat box, but anything you want to share, we will endeavor to pass on to people or we'll have chance for Q&A later on in the session. So I have the chance to introduce not just our great panelists in a minute, but also to introduce this webinar series. So we are focused on self-reliance and labor mobility in a three-part webinar. So this is our kickoff meeting that is more focused on host country skills development with some of the linkages into broader labor mobility. And as someone that's worked mainly on livelihoods trainings in host countries and looked at outcomes and impacts, this is really exciting for me to hear more about, and also to learn from our panelists about some of those broader linkages that either are happening to other countries and other employment programs and so on, or maybe could be happening. So that's kind of the overall aim of this series, to really just deepen into understanding what's happening, what could or should be, and then thinking also about the upcoming Global Refugee Forum progress review and maybe some of the learnings that could or should go into that as well, into some of the themes. So without further ado, I'm going to briefly introduce our panelists and not do them justice in terms of all of the amazing achievements and work that they've done, but give you a bit of a highlight. And then we'll go into just a few rounds of questions. And then, as I mentioned, we'll have some time for Q&A as well. So to start us off, I want to introduce Elizabeth Mukami, who's a technical advisor for economic inclusion at the International Rescue Committee. And she's supporting the design of economic inclusion programs across East Africa and has over 20 years of experience in the field. And then, not in order of my screen at least, we'll introduce Basil Romley, who's the co-founder and director of global initiatives at Jumpstart Refugee Talent, which is a refugee-led Canadian organization linking refugees and employment, which we will get to hear more about. And Basil also represents Jumpstart on the Global Task Force on Refugee Labor Mobility as well. And Jen Wilson from RefugePoint has served as the Director of Third Country Solutions at RefugePoint for the last several years, and also serves on the Global Task Force for Refugee Labor Mobility, and is a member of the Global Family Reunification Network's advisory group as well, which is an amazing area of work that I don't know if we'll hear more about on this call, but I will be learning more about at some point soon. And then William Bakunzi, who's a refugee from the Democratic Republic of Congo, originally living in Uganda. And I've had the pleasure of knowing William since probably 2016 or 2017. So he's an amazing researcher and leads an amazing refugee-led organization. And maybe we'll be speaking mostly today from the vantage point of his work at an organization called Every Shelter, which is helping build housing, create housing for refugees in Nakibali and elsewhere. And he's working there as a social innovation assistant. So, thank you all so much for joining us, participants and panelists. And to start us off, a broad question to help those of us in the room that maybe don't know as much about your work. It'd be great to hear more about how your organization or program really supports refugee skills development in host countries in particular, but then also if it's working with other people, like nationals, for example, or particular groups, that would be great to hear about. So maybe a bit of an overview, because we have some different parts of the world that we're representing and similar ones as well. Jen, do you want to kick us off? And we also don't need to go in an original order. I'm quite informal, so if someone has a burning thought to follow on, jump in.
Great. Thank you so much, Evan, and thank you all for joining today. It's great to be here with you. As Evan mentioned, I do work with RefugePoint, and we're really focused on advancing lasting solutions for refugees. We do that primarily from our work in Kenya, but also are working around the world through staff who are deployed to other locations. and work in some spaces around field building and systems change. So we're sharing what we learn. In terms of supporting refugees with skills building and livelihoods, we do this in a few ways. So in Kenya, where we do most of our direct service work, my colleagues who work on host country solutions are very actively engaged in skills building with refugees, primarily around livelihoods so that they can achieve self-reliance. Because of some restrictions on refugees' abilities to work, this often takes the form of training them with business skills so that they can be entrepreneurs and run and successfully operate their own businesses in largely the informal market there. We are, though, engaged in a lot of advocacy and work to advance economic and social inclusion in the country. So we're hoping that that will unlock some other opportunities for not only formal work, but also skills training. In my portfolio of programs on the third country solutions side, we work on labor mobility. And so there we are focusing on refugees that are in the urban context, but also in the camp-based environment. And we're working primarily with those who already have skills, trying to match them up with opportunities to work in third countries. There are a lot of gaps in terms of the skills development side where people are not able to participate at present in national education and training programs offered in Kenya, and where we see that there could be some really great opportunities to support them in doing that so that their skills will be easily recognized by employers and better align with the requirements that are in place for these jobs. We're working primarily with people in health and also in the construction and skilled trade sectors, also a little bit in hospitality, a little bit in IT here and there. So pretty broad range of sectors and occupations, but also a really diverse range of skill sets and training that people are coming with. We're augmenting that where we can with some support for language skills acquisition, or if we see that there's an opportunity to fill a gap between someone's skills that exist and the skills that they might need for a labor mobility opportunity, we are pursuing that as well. Additionally, we are looking longer term and hoping that we'll be able to partner with the government of Kenya and other actors to open up opportunities to participate in the national vocational education and training structures so that refugees will have a better pipeline to access skills building and training that results in a credential that can be recognized elsewhere and supports labor mobility.
Great, thank you. I already have about 7 follow-up questions for you, but wonderful to hear a bit more about that. And maybe we can kind of move on, Elizabeth, to you, and I think staying in the region and in particular potentially urban refugees, but feel free to share a bit more.
Thank you, Evan. Elizabeth here. I work with the International Rescue Committee. At the IRC, we support people affected by crisis to ensure that they recover and gain control over their lives and continue with their lives, with the support we offer. Now, to ensure that people are supported and continue to build self-reliance or stabilize within these different countries that they are refugees or basically as forcibly displaced populations, we support people by ensuring that, first of all, they stabilize. And number 2, then now towards that stabilization, they need skills that for them to survive, a number of skills. There are entry skills, there are skills within recovery, and there are skills that lead towards self-reliance. However, touching on skills building, there are a number of things. One of the key things is we understand that language can be a big barrier. And one of the key things that we provide can just be basic literacy and numeracy skills to ensure that people are able to interact within the host communities or the populations that they are staying in. And having gained that, then we have other skills, which we feel not only are they necessary for just people to live in the country they are in, but also to make some economic activity out of it. The skills span across many different areas, but one of the things we consider is to make sure that they are dignified skills. They are skills that enable them to earn an income and eventually self-reliance. So some of these skills, other than just the basic language and literacy that enable them to interact, which is also a protection measure and a safety net measure for them, the other skills we look around is employability skills. And these employability skills are both in the informal and formal sector. Within the formal sector, we work towards demand-driven skills. We are not just looking at people gaining skills. And demand-driven meaning we are working from the employer to the supplier side of things, with IRC as a facilitator in between, identifying who are these populations, can they gain some skills, and then where are these skills translating to? They have to translate into employment. So we don't work in isolation. We work with partners, we work with the private sector, we work with the technical vocational education training institutions, and all other key players within the market. This has an advocacy element towards it, because then there is the issue of accreditation, certification, and the like. So working with the government to make sure that also the skills that are gained are not just within, that context. Can they go beyond? Can they cross borders? Can they be relevant time and over beyond when one is a refugee? In the informal sector, these skills are like business skills training, financial literacy, skills that would enable them to have the element of choice, even in the informal sector. When they get into business, what skills do they have? What business skills do they have? They may have had very great business acumen, but then one key and important thing is to make sure that they also understand the business environment, they understand the competition. So coupling all those skills to enable people to settle, and not just to settle, but meaningfully participate in the economies within which they are living at the moment. And even if they choose to move to another country, the skills will still be relevant for them. So the skill being a key tool towards economic self-reliance. Back to you, Evan.
Great, thank you. Yeah, what a great spread. And I'm just glad in particular of talking about accreditation, certification. And I think these are areas that I think we're talking about them more, but it's kind of baffling to me that they haven't been as kind of a part of the norm in terms of self-reliance and livelihoods for displaced people kind of over decades. Thank you. William, it would be great to move to you next to share a bit more about your work with Every Shelter and more broadly.
Thank you very much, Ivan. Thank you for this opportunity, and thank you for everyone following us here. As Every Shelter, come back to your question, as Every Shelter, we focus specifically on shelter. We try to bring a solution to shelter problems, mostly for refugees and sometimes for host communities. Yeah, we have an approach that we use in number use. Yeah, we use a participatory approach so that interest or engage the community so that the solution we are going to implement come directly from them. Yeah, that's how we work. Most of the time we target new arrivals as they are the most one affected by the support or the problem of being refugees. So most of the time we target new arrivals, but sometimes also we target new refugees, mostly vulnerable people. And of course, we at a small portion we handle also host community, but most of the time we target refugees. We don't focus on any particular gender. We focus on both males and females, and most of the time we target youth and women, of course. Yeah, that's Every Shelter.
Great, thank you. William, could I just ask a quick follow-up question? Could you share a bit more about the type of trainings? Because I think in terms of people building houses and so on, I feel like people would be interested in hearing a bit more about the actual trainings that people are doing.
Yeah, we normally do our operation, our implementation through a project called the Shelter Corps Initiative, which have different components. We normally have shelter repairs, we have brick modeling, we have also model village, we have also skylight, we have also design school. Through all those components, we are trying to involve youth. We train them on how to design solutions and how to get involved in providing a solution to the community, mostly vulnerable people. And of course, we prepare them to get employed so that at end of the day, in the future, they can increase their income generating power or capacity. Yeah.
Great, thank you. Thanks for the information. And Basil, over to you. I'm kind of imagining you've your foot across continents in terms of some of your work.
So first, also, thank you so much for having me here today. And I'm, again, for those that were not here initially, with Jumpstart Refugee Talent. We are a refugee-led organization based in Canada, but we have some more limited presence in places like Colombia, Lebanon, and now Syria more recently too. And our goal is connecting refugees with economic opportunities, whether that is meaningful employment or entrepreneurship. And we do that through different programs that we've developed over the years. And while we have a few upskilling programs in the space of employment in Canada and entrepreneurship also in Canada, for the focus for today, I really want to make it more about refugee labor mobility and how we tap into that ecosystem. And I will be touching on that in the future questions a little bit more, but we can maybe just have a little bit of context here. So for Jumpstart, we've really became involved in refugee labor mobility quite early on, back in 2017. We've worked closely with Immigration, Refugee, and Citizenship Canada, IRCC, on designing Canada's pilot, which is the Economic Mobility Pathways pilot. And since then, we've positioned ourselves as a bridge, sort of, between employer demand and a lot of the partners and organizations that are on the ground in host countries, largely in the global south. They're working much more closely with candidates. So on the destination side, or the demand side, which is primarily most of our focus is on Canada, we support employers who are dealing with real labor shortages to better understand how they can recruit through refugee labor mobility. And the strongest demand we've seen is really from healthcare, skilled trades, and that could be, construction, manufacturing, green skills. And in that area, what we've done is that we co-chair a national task force called Refugee 500, which brought together over 30 key stakeholders, which includes the likes of industry associations, the Business Council of Canada, the Canadian Chamber of Commerce. And from it, we created 2 steering committees in sort of the areas or the sectors where the demand is clearest, which is, again, healthcare and skilled trades. And what this has offered us is a really concrete sense of what the kind of skills and profiles that employers will actually hire for. And again, on the source side, we really focus primarily on leveraging some existing programs and partnerships, people that are doing the work there. And our hope over time is to really ensure there is a bit more of a feedback and alignment element to it, just to ensure that we're able and that people, the skills that they're gaining, could really open up additional pathways for them in terms of securing offers in destination countries, accessing these pathways there. And that could be in terms of what some of the skill sets, some of the certification that people could need. And it could be elements around language too, where these gaps often also exist. And we've more recently been also exploring some new upskilling initiatives with localized partnerships, especially in Colombia and Latin America, where we're looking, and I'll be touching on that later on, but where we're looking into, again, ensuring that the skills that people are gaining would feed into 2 outcomes. One would be to ensure that they can potentially relocate through complementary pathways, but also that these skills could be leveraged in those host countries. So looking at that sort of 2 outputs or approach. And back to you.
Yeah, thanks so much. And I'd say that I think you actually, just with that final statement, kind of captured some of the genesis of this webinar series, of us being really interested in thinking about the trainings that are happening that can lead to further labor mobility, but also can help people lead better lives where they are, right? So before I move on to the next kind of round of questions for you all, for people that maybe joined a few minutes afterwards, welcome. Feel free to introduce yourself in the chat, to write questions. We'll have some time for Q&A in just a bit. And I also neglected to say to everyone that this webinar series is co-hosted by the Refugee Self-Reliance Initiative, RefugePoint, and Talent Beyond Boundaries. So some great great work being done from different organizations in this broader sphere, and lots of brilliant minds in this room putting it all together, right? So feel free to also just add your comments, even if you don't have questions, in the chat as well. So for the next kind of round of questions, I'm basically asking about 5 questions in one. So please feel free, panelists, to kind of pick what speaks to you the most. But because we're looking for this first webinar more around kind of host countries and refugees themselves rather than maybe potential employers, although we'd love to hear about that as well, I'd be curious to hear kind of in your work, what are refugees themselves wanting for trainings or types of trainings? Do you feel that this is actually matching a kind of a real demand, or is it market demand? Is it coming from elsewhere, donor priorities, refugees' own skill sets, and so on? So kind of asking just a bit about the different types of trainings and the demand behind them. And then do you think there should be a different focus of skills? Is there a core kind of challenge that you're working with in your organization and in your work around helping this work happen in terms of matching refugees and trainings, or refugees' skill sets and employers' work, and so on? I'll pause there since that's already about 3 to 4 to 5. Jen, do you want to kick us off with whatever speaks to you from that list?
Yeah, sure. I'd be happy to. In our experience, the main types of skills trainings that refugees are requesting are those that they feel confident can lead to a solution. So it's really those that they feel have a concrete outcome, whether that's to allow them to effectively integrate locally and support their families, or to access a labor mobility pathway. Or for some, I think equally important, if they are hoping to return home, to see that there's a path to them being able to apply those skills and make a living in their home country. We do see, as Basil mentioned as well, a lot of demand for language skills training, and this tends to coalesce around where people have seen concrete opportunities for labor mobility. So in the context of Kenya, English language skills, French language skills, and more recently, German language skills are emerging as a priority, with Germany opening up pathways for labor mobility. There's also demand for skills trainings that can help to fill gaps. And so when I speak of this, I'm thinking of things that can help someone maybe close the last little distance between the skills training and the academic background and experience they have and what's required for them to qualify for a job, whether it's in their host country or in a third country. I think of examples like the Canadian Welding Bureau. They have this really wonderful program where they do a competency assessment, and then they have micro-credentials you can work to obtain based on any gaps that are identified in your skill set. And then together, that competency-based assessment and those micro-credentials can then allow you to sit an exam and qualify for a welding job in Canada, which is really quite incredible. Those are very accessible skills trainings. They're smaller modules. They don't take a ton of time. They're available online. They're very affordable. So things like that, I think, are very much in demand, but there aren't a lot of them that exist. And as far as what's driving the demand, I do think there is true market demand behind it. But the true market demand needs to be matched with kind of an equal measure of flexibility or willingness to think differently about how we open up these opportunities for refugees. And the market demand that we see right now is primarily in third countries. In Kenya, I think there is hope that there will be market demand in country ultimately, but Kenya is quite focused on labor mobility, largely for both Kenyans and for refugees right now. So we see the market demand is mostly in third countries. There are some instances where I think donor priorities are influencing the kinds of skills training and the demand that's perceived. But yeah, I think that the language skills, these concepts around trainings that can help to fill a gap, or where some experience is not being recognized through like recognition of prior learning framework, those types of trainings are quite helpful and in demand, although very small in number.
Thank you. I'm noticing this theme of the language. That's fascinating. Elizabeth, over to you.
Thank you again. What do refugees want? refugees would want skills that would promote integration, skills that would promote inclusion, skills that would promote protection, and those that would mostly also enable them to earn an income and gain stability. So in all these, they would want all these skills. But then, as facilitators in the market, we understand that especially in the region, let me talk about the East Africa region, for example, and I'll be building this on an example of one of our flagship projects known as Refugees in East Africa, boosting urban innovations for livelihoods development. In short, please call it REBUILD. It's a very long acronym, but I'll be building our experiences around that. Now, if refugees are asked, what skills would you undertake? In their mind, they have a lot of questions, but people would be like, what is available? Can I do catering? Can I do this? But we understand the market. We understand better that there are so many youth who are graduating from universities, institutions of higher learning, vocational trainings, and they're flooding in the same market to compete for the same opportunities that these refugees who have extra barriers to entry, to access, then it makes it difficult. So yes, refugees, what I would say is refugees want something that will be helpful for them and will give them some quick balance in terms of a standing. Now, you asked another question. Should there be a different set of skills? I would say yes. Why that? A different set of skill to mean that after skilling, then what? So the different set of skills should meet the current market demand. And you have so many people in the market who are trained, who are with the skills. The big question is, then why do they remain unemployed? And employers are advertising every day, we need this kind of a person. So in that regard, that it means there needs to be a different set of skills. A skill set that is demand-driven, employer-driven, private sector-driven, in terms of, are our assessments matching what the employers need? Are our assessments, or when we say labor market assessment, what does it end up meeting? So skill sets that will transition into employment. And I will tell you without being shy that even under the Rebuild project, we trained quite a number of youth. But what happened? We only had 38% transition rate into employment. The reason being that the demand is for the supply supersedes the demand. So we should look at it from the point of, then should there be dual training where we are identifying employers and then saying, look here, employers, what skills do you need? Can we give you, can we support to link you with the refugees to train, and then you employ them, using a different kind of approach, or looking at it from the point of technologically, we understand the kind of TVETs that exist. Let me talk about my region, East Africa. TVETs are there. They've been there since they were set up, I don't know, a long time ago. Does the technology meet the technology in the market? Or they are using very different practical machines, and then when they go to the market, it's a kind of a shock that they need. So looking at that and working with TVETs, working with training institutions to see that also we are bridging the gap that enable them to acquire skills that remain relevant. Key challenge is transition, which we need to speak to even as we speak about skilling. I'll stop at that for now. Thank you.
Great, thank you. I'm going to really quickly ask you a quick follow-up question. Could you just share a bit more about this idea of the dual training? And is that something that's just being spoken about, or is kind of how far along are you in that? Because I think it's almost like a geographically contained version of some of the work that Basil is speaking to, of helping match people and so on.
Great question. This stems from engaging with private sector. More often than not, we would skill while working with TVETs, and then we go to employers, and employers are like, we would want people we are training. So dual skilling would be, can we work with, we've not tested this, but we are thinking of testing that actually. Can we work with the TVETs where we are saying, we have identified these employers, and these are the TVETs we are working with. then they do theory and practical, which will make them come out fully skilled. They know how the job market or the job looks like, and they also understand the theory so that they can connect the dots. So that kind of dual training then would speak to the transition rate from skilling to transition, because the employer now understands, whom am I skilling? And on the other hand, the person understands, what is this about? So connecting the two to enable people have a higher transition rate. Yeah.
Great, thank you. William, over to you for any thoughts on any of the questions, or what other people have shared, obviously. You're muted. You're going to have to unmute yourself.
So let me intervene on this particular question, which skills refugees or host community do they prefer?
Whichever one you'd like. I'm happy to ask them again, though.
Can you hear me now?
I can hear you great.
Okay, I was saying, let me intervene on this particular question about the skills the refugees they prefer. Yeah, in the country where I am here in Nakival settlement, most of the time the refugees they have that dream of learning skills, a lot of skills, from the first skill to the second one, even to the third one. But most of the time they like to learn those ones which can allow them to integrate the job opportunity, the immediate income generating opportunity, so that they can integrate a local life immediately. So that's why they normally prefer some skills better than others. In the context of the shelter field where we work with every shelter, initially we struggle to convince refugees that in the shelter field they can also gain skills at the same time they gain job opportunities. But nowadays, after seeing the previous cohort gaining skills and opportunities, many people they have started joining this domain of field of shelter. Initially, they were mostly preferring like tailoring, hairdressing, mechanics, but nowadays they are also orienting their dream on shelter, so that they can gain both skills and job opportunities, and they can also, by the same way, contribute to providing solution to their fellow refugees. At the same time, they help and they gain job opportunities. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks so much. And I think you raise a really important point around the importance of having a modeling, of sort of seeing, oh, this is a viable pathway, right? And it's hard to understand that until it's being lived out in certain ways. Yeah, thank you. Basil, over to you.
Yeah, so from our end, really, what we see is when refugees or displaced people reach out to us, they're usually asking us for job opportunities in Canada and how can I access these pathways. And there is a bit of a mismatch, that's for sure. So typically where we see a lot of these emails coming from, people sending us their resume, their LinkedIn profile, and a lot of them are people with tech background or finance professionals, could be academics, a lot of different white collar type professionals that really are able to find us and through this big space that we operate within. And in reality, however, is on the destination side, as I mentioned, where we see most of the demand coming from is in areas like healthcare and really trades, be it construction, be it manufacturing. And so there is a bit of that misalignment. On the employer demand side, we reliably return more alternative jobs offers today that look into the sector that I've mentioned before. But then again, when we are having those people that come to us, they're typically coming with very specific backgrounds we're seeing there. And so when we also started really looking here at the different skills and upskilling programs and livelihood programs in the Global South, we saw that a lot of the current existing livelihood and TVET type programs, of course, they only primarily look at local labor market demand, understandably. And so a lot of what we are interested in based on the employer demand is typically absent. Now what we're seeing is there's a lot more conversations taking place and some new pilots that are coming out in the space that are focused on the destination side. So really ones that are very specific to labor mobility under that complementary pathway umbrella. And with those ones, we're seeing also sometimes really the funder priority taking place more so, where it could be a state funder that is very interested in very specific skill sets and the outcome, not just the skill sets, but even the outcomes that they want to see would just be purely based on how many people maybe are relocating, and that is the sort of the success metric. If somebody is unable to relocate for whatever reason and needs to secure a job locally, maybe that is not recorded as a success. So it sort of really deters the cohesion that we think is very important here. And so we want to keep in mind that there is, when we think of upskilling for the purposes of refugee labor mobility, it's a context that has a lot of significant risk. We're operating in an unstable policy and economic environment. Public policy risk is a big factor. We've seen in the US, the shutdown of the program there, or let's call it a pause for now of the program there. In Canada, the Canadian government introduced a cap, so that kind of truly prolonged the processing timeline. And so then the question is, if we're creating a program where we're upskilling people knowing that there is significant demand for these skill sets, well, what happens in this case? 8 months down the road, the program is shut down. What do people do with those skill sets that they've developed? The other path or the other model that we've seen in this space, of course, is the one where it's more about the hire, train, and relocate, where there is commitment from employers that Beyond Boundary has done a great job too in that area, working especially in Europe and Italy as an example, where candidates are being upskilled for very specific opportunities. But that just really shifts a lot of the risk for employers, which is great. But then again, that's not necessarily where scale could exist, because what we're telling employers, well, on top of waiting maybe in Canada 12 months for a visa to be issued, you're going to have to wait and take the risk of people going through this multi-month program and then passing it successfully. So if we're going to be looking at those two different models, which we should, at least for the one where maybe we can, again, bring people together and just really focus on that area where there is a bit more of a cohesion and a design, a way we design it that looks at those different pathways together. But yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Oh, there's so much in what you just shared. Maybe just a follow-up question, and then also kind of open to the group. We'll move into our last round of the formal panel questions. And so why don't we actually just go in the opposite order? So Basil, if I kind of turn it back to you, and then we'll go backwards and then move into some questions from the chat. But I'm curious, Basil, kind of what you just said, so this is kind of picking up strands of that. Do you feel like what are the risks, or is it possible, is it a good idea, bad, of some of these programs that are really being dual track on purpose and really looking at the kind of local demand and then maybe matching, like, is that a lot to do simultaneously for organizations, or is that helpful? So that's kind of the question. And then the overall question, just for all of you panelists, so Basil, feel free, is just kind of looking ahead at recommendations that you have. So what should we be doing in this space around livelihoods and skills training, either to really support truly sustainable, I can put that in quotation marks, we hope, income generating work, livelihoods, actual professions for refugees, where they are or where they might be. So any kind of takeaway thoughts would be great as that broader question. But Basil, over to you. I kind of, again, asked you 3 questions in one. Take your pick.
No, and I think I will just input it into the overall conversation, just because I do think it would be very difficult for one stakeholder to take on a project, an upskilling program that has to look at local labor market demand needs, destination, have the competency and the ability to develop and deliver the curricula itself, And so this is why it's really important when we think of such programs to think of it as an ecosystem, that there are these partners that do great work and they're specialists at what they do. And could we bring those partners together and work together towards, a common goal? Because ultimately, whether the person is getting employed in the host country or destination, ultimately the most important part is really them and that economic opportunity that was created to them. And so in the spirit of that deeper collaboration, we do think that we need really to bring in even employers, industry association, and destination countries at the table from the beginning, alongside training providers, refugee-led organizations and NGOs, and where possible, employer and local experts in host countries. It's never easy always to find exactly a skill set that is there is high demand for it both, but those opportunities do exist. So could we prioritize those one is the big question. So the goal is really to design curricula that would be clearly responsive to employer demand, to regulatory requirements in places like Canada and different European countries, while at the same time, or Australia, of course, and other destination countries through refugee labor mobility. But also, like we mentioned, really ensures that people would be potentially able to leverage those skill sets in those host countries that they're currently residing at, whether it's in Latin America, East Africa, or Africa more broadly, or in the Middle East. So the skills we do believe should still have value locally, and that dual track, as you mentioned, perspective. Again, it's not easy, but it adds a lot of great value, and that's why the ecosystem approach would be important. And second, we do need more sustainable shared risk financing models. I mean, that is also another major challenge in this space. Right now, the strong expectation that employers will cover most of the costs, or maybe a state will come in and usually will fund it, but otherwise it's usually employers that cover most of these expenses. That's important that they would cover a lot of it. But in the long run, it's important for sustainability is to ensure that we have some of that funding upfront in place, because not every employer is going to be willing to risk all that right off the bat. I mean, we're already operating with a very complicated space, so we do want to de-risk it a little bit for some of those partners that we're working with. And the question become really who pays for what and at what stage is going to be an important one. This is an area also that we've been exploring very, very closely with different partners, from funders to delivering organizations, and looking at ways for philanthropic or public funding to take more of the early risk and enable programs to operate at scale, while employers commit to hiring and contribute to costs that are closer to the point of employment. And without that kind of shared risk approach, it would be really very difficult to move from tiny pilots here and there to systems change. And really, I think the last thing to keep in mind would be that we're consciously designing for uncertainty and to be transparent about it with candidates. Again, policy changes, caps, processing delays, shift in employer demand are not always very rare events. These things do and could happen. And they're just part of the landscape itself when it comes to migration. And that means that when we invite refugees into long training programs, we have the responsibility to be honest about the risks and to ensure as far as possible that the skills they're gaining are, again, usable in more than a single scenario. And for some, that means relocation into a job at a destination country. For others, it may mean better access to work in host countries or being in stronger position when conditions change again in the future. And from our perspective, really is to keep bringing the labor mobility and employer lens into these conversations and work with partners so that when refugees invest in upskilling, they're doing so into pathways that are both realistic and resilient.
Thank you. I appreciate designing for uncertainty. I feel like that's probably how we're all living right now, right? After 2025. Great. William, over to you for any recommendations you have for kind of livelihood skills training in this space. You have to unmute yourself again.
I'm sorry. As the market demand matters, I've been maybe recommending, if possible, to hit the objective. Work quality matters. So the training quality, the training skills we give, the quality matters. That's why we always support work to orient people, our trainees, to a kind of a professionalism, so that on the market they can be more competitive. We also encourage kind of innovative ideas so that they adapt to the market. Yeah, that's why normally we encourage them to develop a kind of design spirit so that they become more competitive. This also goes with capacity building. Most of the time, our trainees, they have limitations. They don't have resources to either put in practice whatever they have learned. That's why we always encourage a kind of linkage to financial institutions and to employers or job opportunities, so that at the end of the day, the skills they have learned, they can put them in practice and be more competitive. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Very wise words. Yeah, I really appreciate that. Elizabeth, over to you.
Okay, I was getting my unmute button. One of the key things that I can hear from all of us, and which I can refer to as our denominator, is we are talking about same actors in this space. We are talking about private sector, we are talking about employers, we are talking about financial institutions, we are talking about governments. So that is a key denominator. That tells me that we need to design these skilling programs with them at the center of this. Yes, the refugee is at the center of all this, but then are we talking to them at the design? Are we designing programs with them? And this, I would stretch further and say we may not design with donors, but we need to speak to donors the realities in terms of, yes, we could be asked to design a program that is for skilling, but we need to speak about meaningful skilling. Yeah, we need to look at meaningful skilling in the informal sector. What would meaningful skilling look like? Skilling that would enable people to thrive within the markets that they are in, the economies that they are in. In the formal sector, what does meaningful skilling look like? Skilling that does not just come, I've done 2 weeks and I'm expecting this person to compete with someone who has studied for the last 4 years, and I'm thinking the skills will be the same, and then come to the job market and you are asked about what experience do you have? What experience do they have? So on that, what should we do? I was just scribbling down some things as you were asking the question, that we need to do something called building also the bridges. This, I would call it a bundled approach from the kind of programming that we do. But I'm not saying we do it holistically, but we need to think together. What would building bridges look like? Or what would be an enabler in this case look like? Offer opportunities for internships, for people to gain experience, apprenticeships, create networks, let people have networks within these apprenticeships and internships. And also, what does job matching look like for us? Not people scaling in being a plumber and then they go and they are put in the stores, or they are becoming a cleaner in the stores. How are we matching these skills? So looking at the pain points and speaking to them and speaking to employers, and then unlocking enablers, different, the regulatory. When you look at the financial service provision or the financial inclusion, it has its own enablers. Speak to the enablers. What are we doing to the regulators? What are we doing to the traditional forms of people identifying, like documentation? We keep saying there is a documentation challenge. Can we speak to the regulators and say, these are the legally recognized documents for refugees they should be able to achieve? So that will bring in the element of inclusion, So speaking to that. And lastly, I would talk about also inclusion. When we talk about inclusion, I'm talking about gender barriers. There are many barriers that exist. Yes, refugees have challenges, but there are other challenges that come further for women. Can we look at, for example, how are women getting space to participate in this skilling? They have children. How are we taking care of that? For example, are we doing like childcare, supporting childcare so that I don't have to be stressed as a refugee that my child is at home and I'm supposed to concentrate on a skilling? I wouldn't be able to. But if I know my child is safe and I'm able to concentrate, then I'm meaningfully participating. So addressing those barriers for women that include accessibility, so that holistically, we are building an employment team that can actually concentrate on the skilling that they are undertaking. Thank you. Back to you.
Thank you so much. I'm struck as you were speaking about so much of what you said, I feel like is applicable to everyone, to anyone in a workforce, right? It's interesting when we're talking about refugees as workers, right? And what is true, and then maybe where we need to think more specifically. Thank you. Jen, over to you.
Thank you. I'll keep my comments brief. I know we're short on time, but I will just add to some of the recommendations that have been shared already that I do think there's a need to not only invest in the hard skills for people to be able to meet requirements for job opportunities or realize livelihoods, but also, especially if they're going to be competing in the formal market, whether it's in the host country context or in a third country context, to invest in some coaching and mentoring to help them make that transition and to be on good footing to compete. A lot of times we are, in situations where people think that just by virtue of having completed a training program, that people will be able to go successfully into the interview. But if, in the case of Kenya, if you've been in a protracted refugee situation for decades, maybe were even born in a camp, and have lived your whole life there, everything that you've been able to access has been on the basis of deficits and needs. And we really want to support people in being in an assets-based, strengths-based posture. And that's not an easy switch to make. So I think there's a lot to be done there in terms of building those skills of presenting yourself as an asset that is of value to an employer. Additionally, some financial literacy training or financial capability training is really important, whether you're working on a livelihoods project or starting your own business in a host country context or entering into formal employment. There's a whole bucket of things I would recommend around how we approach training. I think some of this is best achieved in a kind of transnational partnership way of bringing together destination country and host country actors, especially in government, in credentialing and licensing authorities, in training institutions, but also in trade unions and industry associations, calling those players to the table and asking them to do the work of aligning their programs and their requirements. It is really deep work. A lot of us in the humanitarian sector are not experts in it, and we need them to really undertake that and own that, especially if it's a demand for workforce that we are wanting to work with them to meet. So I think getting to that alignment, again, where the training results in a recognizable skill, a recognizable credential that unlocks a job opportunity is really quite important. Also working to establish frameworks that recognize prior learning. So we're shifting away from this mode of looking at whatever an individual refugee happens to have been able to access throughout their lifetime and trying to make that fit into these criteria that are often very specific and very narrow. If you are from Democratic Republic of the Congo and Belgium doesn't want to recognize your high school diploma because it was obtained between 1992 and 2008, there should be another way for you to demonstrate that you have the knowledge and the skills that represents. So really thinking about how to recognize that prior learning, integrating competency-based assessments, so we're not having people start from the beginning and spend so much time, sometimes so many resources to try to meet a requirement. I think that's another really great place for us to look. And again, the micro-credentialing, the things that can be accessible online, low cost, help to fill a little gap that is preventing someone from accessing an opportunity, I think all really critical. The last thing I'll say, I would recommend, to anyone who's working with donors, or perhaps you are a donor or you're in a position of influence with donors, is to really advocate for a person-centered, a human-centered approach. So while we may be coming at it from an angle of wanting to support local integration in host countries, or maybe our aim is to support labor mobility, let's ultimately focus on investing in the person and giving them the access to the best skills training possible to support them in finding a solution even if it's not the one that we were aiming towards. So I think those are the things that I would really underscore and put on the table. Thank you.
Great, thanks so much. Again, such wise words. Okay, made the faux pas as moderator of having 5 minutes left for Q&A. So we have some great questions in the Q&A box. I think there might be some in the chat as well. I don't have the bandwidth of multitasking to scroll through, but any panelists, if you see questions that you want to respond to, that would be wonderful. For the sake of time, I'm just going to pose some questions at people, and then if anyone, other panelists want to write in the chat, just quick responses. There were some great questions, and I'd say maybe Jen, back to you. Okay, I see you're already typing about this, but Nia Misra, sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name, but you asked a great question about working with unions to build skills of refugees, and is that happening? You also were wondering about the ILO and kind of that engagement and that idea of having rights, not just the right to work, but the rights at work, speaking of treating refugees as people and workers. So Jen, I don't know if you have any quick responses to that, if that is something active. So that's one for you to quickly think about. And then Basil, there was a great question around the top 3 considerations that you'd encourage companies to think about when funding or implementing a program to train refugees. And Elizabeth, maybe you'd want to briefly come in on that too. That might bring us to the top of the hour briefly. Jen, any
All right.
45 seconds?
Sure, I'll be super quick.
Yeah.
Neha, thank you so much for the question about unions and apprenticeship programs. We are working to try to do this more. We often find that our best entry point to that is through industry associations, national credentialing and licensing authorities, and government agencies. They're often at the table with those unions. So we are working to unlock that more and build some understanding of how refugees can be viable workforce and also union members. So I feel like we're kind of at the beginning of that. In terms of your question around the ILO standards and making sure that people's rights are respected in the workplace, we really do our best to vet employers to ensure that they are honoring the rights of workers. And in our case, we've worked primarily with Canada, which I think does have some really strong controls in place in terms of how they deem employers to be eligible to participate. But it's a lens that we bring as we're considering any opportunity in an area I think that warrants some further consideration.
Great, thank you. Elizabeth, you'd unmuted yourself. Do you want to jump in?
Yes, I wanted to talk about 2 things. The ILO, we are making sure that in every discussion with employers, we are bringing in the ILO decent jobs charter to make sure that there are minimum standards that must be made. You know, the standards that can go below, that must be maintained to ensure that the jobs that are offered, the payment that is offered is what is offered also to locals, but not locals. It must be dignified. So that is one. On the trade unions, I must say we have not touched that. Maybe just enabling through governments, working with governments. Like, for example, right now we are working with Nairobi City County government for trade licenses to provide space for trading, and also for KCCA, Kampala City Authority. We are also working with that. We are working with all the regulators, but for trade unions, I can say that one is still something we can get into, even though I know, we all know the barriers that come with that. It is for locals, it is for what, so we can still talk about that sometime, maybe later. Thank you.
Great. And then 30 seconds, Basil, maybe one instead of 3. Any thoughts?
Okay. So just quickly 2 things. So on one side, it would be really important for us to bring in the employer very early on. So when the training program is being developed, it's responsive again to things that they're going to actually hire for. So engaging them in the design, but also very importantly to ensure that the employer themselves understand some of the needs that these candidates have. A lot of the demand comes from these smaller municipalities in Canada, where a lot of the workers are not used to working with refugees or people of color. So ensuring, and through us, that they have that understanding and the training in place so that colleagues are able to be very welcoming, that they're able to match this person when they arrive with a colleague of theirs that can introduce them to the town, to the city, that can be their guide through that process. So there are multiple elements that are important for them to accommodate for, just like it's important to accommodate for their needs in the design of the programs.
Thank you. Okay, we will close on the hour. Thank you all so much. Panelists, thank you. This was a wonderful conversation. Clearly, we're just getting started. Participants, audience, thank you so much. And thanks for the questions and the comments. Please join us. I believe our next one is now December 3rd, which it'll be looking more at the demand side. So come back for the second part of the conversation. And thank you all very much again. Enjoy the rest of your days. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.